kiwi fruit are delicious and they grow really well here in Tasmania. However, in summer they can really go crazy and turn into a massive jungle that you could get lost in. It reminds me of one of the Doctor Who shows. I think it was The Seeds of Doom or something like that. I don't remember the exact title, where a plant went crazy and was taking over. But the job here now in springtime is to cut these back. I'm actually running late. They're actually shooting now, and I really should have pruned these back probably about 3-4 weeks ago, immediately after picking the fruit. I used to prune in summer, but I found that when the bushes were cut back and the fruit was actually exposed to the frost in winter when it was ripening, that I had a lot of fruit that would get frost burn. Now, of course, you could cover that with a frost mat, but keeping it on over the windy weather in winter is a bit difficult. So I found the solution was simply to leave all these vines on and then cut them back after the fruit had been harvested. When I harvested the fruit a few weeks ago, the weather was not that exciting to be outside pruning, so they got left. But now I have to get it done because they're going to grow, and all this excess vine needs to be cut back. It's a little bit of a jungle and it's really hard to know where to start, but you just have to get in and do it. Now, I of course would never recommend that anybody actually chose to grow kiwi fruit in this way, where they're so wild. The reason mine are like this is because they initially were on trellises, but I had built the trellises out of poles that I had cut out of the forest here, just eucalypt poles, and within a couple of years they rotted off and the trellises fell over. And that happened at the time when I was building our house and was very busy, didn't have time to set them up and to repair things. So the result is that the vines went absolutely crazy, and it's really difficult once they've gone like this to actually get them back and get them trained again. I think the only solution in my situation really is to put in some new kiwi fruit at some stage on some good, well-built trellises, and when they come into production to actually get rid of these. But in the meantime, I have to work with what I have and to bring these back to a size that is manageable so they won't completely take over the area. The first stage of this pruning is really getting the rough off, getting it back to some sort of shape, and then second stage is coming in and tidying it up, cutting it correctly. So because it's such an entanglement, sometimes you maybe just be hacking it off anywhere so that you can actually get access, but then you come back and actually make sure it's cut properly back to the buds. Now, are kiwi fruit worthwhile growing? Yes indeed, I believe they are if you're in a climate that will suit them. The reason is here that we actually harvest them in late winter, and it means that we have some nice fresh fruit with very high vitamin C coming along in the end of winter and early spring, when fresh fruit is rather rare and very welcome. But if you choose to plant kiwi fruit, consider the size of these and what they can turn into, particularly the length of growth that you see here. And remember that you need plenty of space to do it. They're not really a plant for a small suburban backyard. If you're in that situation, you're probably better to try a kiwi berry, which is a much smaller, a grape-sized version of a kiwi fruit and grows on a much smaller vine. I have one male, and the male is the largest plant here, and 3 females. Now you can grow, I think it's up to 6 females per male. You need them fairly close proximity to each other. Now, in terms of pruning of kiwi fruit and pruning them for fruiting, I'm basically self-taught. My observation of watching how they grow is that the fruit, as you'll see this one, small one here that's been left, tends to occur on the current year's growth. So the new growth that occurs in the spring then flowers and sets fruit. It's come from where I've cut it here last season, and there's been a new growth and there's flower and fruit there. So that means that when you're actually pruning, you're not cutting off fruiting material. It's fruiting material that's going to come out in the spring. So the buds like this are going to grow and give you fruit. So it's simply a matter of finding a bud and cutting back to it. So you really only need to allow one bud past the old growth. So like here's an example, there's a little bud there, so that if I cut it at that point, and this one I'll take right out of the road if I can, and this one would then come out and create new growth which would flower and fruit. So it isn't really that difficult. Of course you need to create shape and design, which I don't have here. On a trellis you need to be keeping it and training it to your trellis. Here's another example. You can see fruit that's been left because it wasn't very good, but you can see how this was last spring's growth, and back here is the previous year's growth that I didn't cut back perhaps as much as I could have, but as the new growth has come out, it has flowered and set fruit very close on that growth. So this is the way you need to cutting back to the bud, and so it will then come out with new growth which will flower. The first instinct in relation to these prunings is that they can be put through a chipper and turned into compost. However, the cost of small home size wood chippers is rather high and they're rather inefficient, particularly compared to larger machinery. So really it isn't time efficient to chip these, particularly if you don't have a disposal problem. If you live in town where it's hard to get rid of them, I can understand your need for it, but here it really doesn't work. It is far more efficient to actually buy pre-made compost that has been made by large machinery and use that rather than try and chip this. That's a bit small, that one, for you, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't mind. Small, I can carry small things. Big things are too heavy.
Oh, okay. Rather than do that, I make my compost out of softer materials that the worms are easily going to break down, the grass, weeds and scraps from the kitchen. But with this stuff, it is a pest to try and clean it up and get rid of it, but the simplest way is to pile it up, put it on a rope and let Samuel tow it off into the forest, and in the forest it can then be broken down by the microbes the same way as they deal with the limbs that fall from the trees every day. So the result at the end of the process is still pretty wild, but at least there's a lot more space now for that crazy growth that's going to come in the summer.